Welcome to the Orchard Farm School District Policy GBH training on staff and student relations.
The goal of this policy is to protect students from harm and staff members from allegations of misconduct by requiring staff members to maintain professional boundaries with students. Policy GBH addresses the importance of maintaining appropriate relations between staff members and students. This would include any child, whether or not they attend the Orchard Farm School District. The district does not intend to interfere with or impede appropriate interactions between staff and students.
Policy GBH outlines some absolute prohibitions, and they are as follows. Number 1, touching, caressing, fondling, or kissing a student in a sexual manner. Number 2, dating a student or discussing or planning a future romantic or sexual relationship with a student. And number 3, making sexual advances toward a student or engaging in a sexual relationship with a student.
Number 4, engaging in any conduct that constitutes illegal harassment of discrimination as defined by policy AC, or that could constitute a violation of that policy if pervasive. And number 5, engaging in conduct that violates board policies, regulations, or procedures, or constitutes criminal behavior.
There are exceptions to these prohibitions outlined in the policy, and they are as follows. An emergency situation or an educational purpose might justify deviation from some of the professional boundaries set out in this policy. Staff members might be related to students or have contact with students outside the school environment through friends, community activities, or participation in civic, religious, or other organizations.
These contacts might justify deviation from some of the standards set in this policy. Under no circumstances will educational or other purpose justify deviating from the absolute prohibition section in this policy. Staff members must be prepared to articulate the reason for any deviation from the requirements of this policy and must demonstrate that he or she maintained an appropriate relationship with students.
The district encourages staff members to consult with supervisors prior to engaging in behaviors or activities that might violate professional boundaries as defined in the policy.
Policy GBH also defines failure to maintain boundaries. Failure to maintain boundaries is defined as follows. Unless an educational purpose exists or an exception as defined in this policy applies, examples of situations where professional, physical, and emotional boundaries are violated include, but are not limited to, number 1, being alone with student in a room with closed or locked door or with lights off. Counselors or others who need to speak with students confidentially should discuss appropriate manner with supervisor.
Number 2, meeting students alone, one-on-one, in non-work related setting without a parent being present, even with parental permission. Number 3, associating with students in any setting where students are consuming or encouraged to use alcohol, tobacco, or any product or service prohibited to minors. Number 4, communicating to students about sexual topics verbally or by any form of written, pictorial, or electronic communication.
Number 5, discussing staff members' personal problems with or in the presence of students. Number 6, sponsoring parties for students outside of school unless as part of an extracurricular activity that is appropriately supervised by additional staff members. Number 7, inviting students to staff members' home. Number 8, being present when students are fully or partially nude. Number 9, sending students on personal errands. And number 10, allowing students to drive the staff member's vehicle.
Number 11, providing a student transportation in a staff member's personal vehicle without supervisor's approval unless another staff member or the student's parent or guardian is also present in the vehicle. Number 12. Allowing any student to engage in behavior that would not be tolerated if done by other similarly situated students. Number 13. Giving gifts to individual students without permission or approval of a supervisor. Or number 14. Frequently pulling a student from another class or activity to be with the staff member.
Policy GBH also specifically defines electronic communication as follows. Staff members are encouraged to communicate with students and parents or guardians for educational purposes using a variety of effective methods, including electronic communication. As with other forms of communication, staff members must maintain professional boundaries with students while using electronic communication, regardless of whether the communication methods are provided by the district or the staff member uses his or her own personal electronic devices, accounts, web pages, or other forms of electronic communication.
Staff communication must be professional and student communication must be appropriate at all times. Staff members may only communicate with students electronically for educational purposes between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. unless an emergency condition is imminent.
When communicating electronically, staff members must use district-approved devices, accounts, and forms of communication when available. If these resources are not available, the staff member's supervisor may authorize communication with students using the staff member's personal telephone numbers, addresses, web pages, or accounts to organize or facilitate a district-sponsored class or activity. Staff members may be required to send these communications simultaneously to their supervisor.
Staff use of any electronic communication is subject to the district's policies, regulations, and procedures, including but not limited to policies, regulations, procedures, and legal requirements governing the confidentiality and release of information about identifiable students. Employees who obtain pictures or other information about identifiable students through their connections with the district are prohibited from posting such information on personal websites or personal social networking websites without supervisor permission.
The district discourages staff members from communicating electronically with students for reasons other than educational purposes.
The policy does outline consequences for staff members who may be in violation of the policy, and it states staff members who violate this policy will be disciplined up to and including termination of employment. Depending on the circumstances, the district may report staff members to law enforcement and the Children's Division of the Social Services for further investigation, and the district may seek revocation of the staff member's license with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Policy GBH also specifically identifies reporting methods. Any person, including a student, who has concerns about or is uncomfortable with a relationship or activities between staff members and a student should bring this concern immediately to the attention of the principal, counselor, or supervisor. Any staff member who possesses knowledge of evidence of possible violations of this policy must immediately make a report to the district's administration. The district will not discipline, terminate, or otherwise discriminate against a staff member for reporting in good faith any action that may be a violation of this policy.
This completes your training session over Policy GBH and Staff and Student Relations. All board policies are available through the district website. If you have any questions relating to this session, please contact your building administrator or supervisor.
This is the Alcohol and Substance Abuse Prevention Training. There's a lot of material to cover here, and if you'd like more information, please do not hesitate to contact the guidance or the social work department. Every one of us in Orchard Farm here has a student that has or is being affected in some way by alcohol and drug use and abuse. It could be the students themselves, it could be their parents, aunts, uncles, friends, cousins. And also, we as staff probably have a personal connection with drugs and alcohol from our families and friends as well. Addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing brain disease, and it's characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite the harmful consequences. It's considered a brain disease because it changes our brain's structure and functioning. It has serious consequences. It's also preventable and treatable. If left untreated, the consequences can be permanent and fatal. If you look at the screen, the picture on the right, it's a picture of a normal brain and a brain that's been on meth for 7 years. So you can tell there's definitely a physical component, and it does affect your brain physically. So why do people use alcohol and drugs? They use it for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is to feel good. So when drugs and alcohol are abused, they tend to produce an intense feeling of pleasure. When the euphoria or the high wears off, other effects might take place, kind of prolonging the good feeling. For example, stimulants like cocaine are used and people feel a euphoric high, and that's followed by a boost of energy. If people are using opiates like a heroin, they have a high and they also have kind of a sense of relaxation at the end. Dopamine is our feel-good chemical in our brains, and some drugs release 2 to 10 times more dopamine than normal, and that makes our feel-good chemical skyrocket. Some people use drugs and alcohol to feel better. They might suffer from a mental illness like anxiety or depression. They might not even know they have these conditions, so they begin to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol to kind of relieve the distress that they're feeling. Stress can also play a critical factor in the beginning use and the continued use of drugs and alcohol. Some people use substances to do better. They might feel pressure to enhance themselves chemically, to enhance their physical or their cognitive abilities. So we see that a lot with bodybuilders or weightlifters. They use steroids. And we also see it with college students using stimulants to kind of stay up all night and study. Another factor is curiosity. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable here because they have a strong influence of peer pressure, and they also have high risk-taking behaviors. The initial decision to use drugs and alcohol is a voluntary decision. However, the continued use seriously damages the ability for self-control. There are physical changes in the brain and in the body in the areas that help us use decision-making, judgment, learning, and memory, and this helps explain why people still continue to engage in these behaviors even after they suffer horrible consequences. This is just a list of some common physical signs to look out for if you suspect drug use or abuse. It's really important to keep in mind that if you see a person that shows any of these symptoms, it doesn't necessarily mean that he or she is using drugs. The key is to really watch for change. It's important to watch for any significant change in a person's physical appearance, their personality, their attitude, or their behavior. So stuff to look out for is like loss of appetite, poor coordination, unable to walk, if they have a unique smell to their clothing or their belongings, if they're sweating, if they have extreme sleepiness or extreme energy. Please report any of these signs. You don't have to confront the student or the parent or the staff member if you suspect anything. The guidance staff or the social worker or the principal will kind of take care of that for you. If everyone kind of has their eyes and ears open, we can get people the help that they need. These are more behaviors to watch out for, so look for things like a drop in academics suddenly, or if they have a change in behavior, or if they're overly moody, or if they change their grooming habits, like if they normally have great hygiene and all of a sudden they let their hygiene slip. That can be a warning sign. These also may be normal, like teenage or adolescent behaviors, but they can also be a sign of drug and alcohol use and abuse. Again, just report them on the safe side. Counselors, principals, social workers, we can kind of investigate and determine if a child's under the influence. Don't worry about false reports. That's our job to kind of weed out those things. We're all working on the same team with the same goal, and that goal is to keep our students and our staff and our families here healthy, successful, and safe. This is just a quick list of some drug-specific symptoms just to kind of keep in mind. So, for example, if you see somebody with glassy red eyes or they have a distinct kind of sweet odor, marijuana could be an issue. If someone appears intoxicated but does not smell of alcohol, maybe they have an issue with inhalants. If you're looking at their eyes and they have contracted pupils, it could suggest that they're using heroin or some sort of opiates. This is just a quick reference guide, something to keep in your desk or just to keep in mind when you're interacting with people. Childhood and adolescence is kind of a critical time for us to focus on prevention. The brain is still really a work in progress and is still developing until about the mid-20s. The fact that it's not fully developed really puts kids at a greater risk for trying and using alcohol and drugs, and these substances can have permanent effects on the brain's development. We want to look at times of transition. These are critical. Things like divorce or changing schools or moving. We need to pay extra close attention to students experiencing these situations because they're at an increased risk. Also, kids transitioning from elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school are something we need to keep an eye on also. Studies are showing that when students see that drugs and alcohol are harmful, their use and abuse kind of goes down. So prevention really is the key, and knowledge is power. The more knowledge a student has, the more likely they will be able to abstain from drug and alcohol use. Prevention programs, when implemented correctly, have been shown to be really effective. So what can we do? We really need to be aware. We need to pay attention to our students, watch out for changes in mood or behavior. It might turn out to be nothing, but it could also end up saving their life. We also need to know the facts. Stay current with facts about drug and alcohol. We're not able to cover every aspect of every drug and alcohol symptom here, so I really encourage you to do further research. Go to trainings, ask our local agencies in the area about drugs and alcohol, those kinds of things. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the Guidance or Social Work Department at any time. We also want to be a positive role model. Modeling is shown to be critical. Students see us every day for about 7 hours. We need to be positive role models for them. We need to show them how to effectively handle stress and coping skills. We need to show them how to develop healthy relationships with peers and with staff. We need to show them what's possible. I want to make sure that the staff feels like they have help. We're really blessed to have lots of agencies in our county to work with. Preferred Family Healthcare, we have a close relationship with. Bridgeway, we have a close relationship with. Alternative Behavioral Care, we have a close relationship with. They have child and adult programs at these agencies. Also, right in our own school, you can come talk to the guidance office, or the social work office, the nurse's office, principals, our security resource officer. All of these places are here to help you and to help our students. If you have any questions, please contact me for more information on these agencies, and I can also get families referrals for these places as well. This is the Orchard Farm School District Basic Mental Health Training. Here are some common myths about mental disorders and mental health. The first one is that mental disorders are a sign of weakness or personality flaws. You should just use willpower, ignore the problem, a kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. These beliefs are really inaccurate and very hurtful, and ignoring mental health issues can make things a lot worse. They have nothing to do with laziness or a lack of willpower. Another myth is that people with mental disorders are violent. In fact, that's not true. Individuals with mental health disorders are not any more likely than the general population to be violent. In fact, research has shown that they are more likely to be the victims of crimes. Another myth is that healthy people are not affected by traumatic events. Well, that's not true either. Trauma can affect anyone regardless of how strong or psychologically healthy that you are. There are several different categories of mental illness and several different diagnoses within those categories. Here's a list of some mental illness diagnoses, but not all of them. There are anxiety disorders, which affect about 19% of America's population. There are depressive disorders, which affect about 7% of America. There are addiction disorders, which affect about 8% of people. And they no longer use the term abuse, like alcohol abuse or substance abuse, because it became a very subjective measure. They use the term use, such as alcohol use or opioid use. There are also eating disorders like bulimia or anorexia, and they affect about 2% of the population. It's really important to remember that the majority of these disorders can be treated successfully by counseling, medication, and therapy, and it's usually a combination of all three of these things that are the most effective, but it does differ for each person. Here is a list of the more common mental illness diagnoses in children. Major depressive disorder, it's also known as depression. Some of the characteristics are fatigue, hopelessness, excessive guilt, weight loss, difficulty concentrating, and in children and adolescents, irritability is very common. There is no specific cause and it can happen at any age. There is a likelihood of onset around puberty. Females are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression than males. The risk for suicide is present at all times during an episode, so it's really important to keep alert when working with people experiencing major depression. ADD and ADHD, attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a neurodevelopmental disorder which is in the same category as intellectual disability and autism. The picture on the screen is of an average brain and a brain with ADHD, and you can see there's some biological components. It's also known as hyperactivity. Some of the characteristics are difficulties with finishing any activity involving concentration at school or at play, careless mistakes, they do not seem to be listening to anything that's said to them, sometimes they're impulsive, restless, a lot of times they have organizational issues. There's no specific cause, but they're linked to a variety of factors including genetics and the environment. It appears in about 5% of children and 2.5% of adults, and it occurs 2 times more likely in males than females. 70 to 80% of children with ADHD respond to medications when they are properly used. Separation anxiety disorder is another component of an anxiety disorder. Sometimes a child shows intense anxiety and possibly panic when they have to leave a loved one. Often it appears suddenly to a child with no previous symptoms. Symptoms last at least 4 weeks in children and at least 6 months in adolescents. They may feel dizzy, have headaches, or have stomach aches or nausea. This can also transfer into school phobia. They are afraid to attend school because they fear separation from a parent or a guardian. This is the most common anxiety disorder in children under the age of 12. Autism spectrum disorder. This now includes Asperger's and pervasive developmental disorder, which is PDD, and is included in the neurodevelopmental disorders. The severity will vary with each individual. It can affect intellectual skills, it can affect the 5 senses, the ability to understand or use language, unusual postures or body movements. It can affect eye contact. It's more likely to affect boys instead of girls. It's about a 4-to-1 ratio. Sometimes these students fail to develop normal relationships with parents or peers. They have trouble understanding social interactions. They have trouble with language. They have repetitive movements. They can have strict adherence to rigid routines, and they can be very distressed when anything in their physical environment has changed. There's no specific cause identified yet, but therapy is shown to be very effective in treating situations with autism. Generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, or anxiety, is another category I wanted to talk about. It's really common for children and for people to have fears, and over time these fears should fade or you learn to cope. However, if they persist or if they interfere with a normal daily routine or daily function, then there might be something more serious going on, and it would be a good idea to seek professional help. Some physical signs to look for would be muscle tension, irritability, easily fatigued, can't sleep or sleep too much. They can't control a worry, they have upset stomachs or headaches, muscle pains, especially in the neck or shoulder area, and they can have compulsive behaviors or avoidance behaviors too. Females are twice as likely as males to experience this disorder, and anxiety is very common and also very treatable with the right therapy and sometimes medication. Reactive attachment disorder is another thing very common in children. It's also known as RAD. It's characterized as a trauma and a stressor-related disorder, and that's in the same category as like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Children will rarely seek comfort when they're distressed or upset, and they're not going to respond to comfort when they're distressed. And a lot of times they're going to have a lot of unexplained irritability or sadness or fearfulness, even in situations that seem very safe. Children often do not respond to behavioral consequences with RAD, and they're very focused on getting their needs met. Oftentimes they attach material objects to fill some emotional needs, like a special toy or a special game. The cause is thought to occur during infancy. Sometimes the child has a pattern of repeated changes in a primary caregiver, such as a foster care system or a really chaotic family situation, and their emotional needs and sometimes their physical needs were not met when they were infants. This disturbance is usually evident before age 5, and there's no medication specifically to treat RAD. Students with RAD have difficulty regulating their emotions, and they can be really challenging in a classroom setting. The most important things for educators is to establish a trusting relationship with these students, and consistency is also very comforting for students with RAD. They know what kind of consequence they have each and every single time. A lot of these signs and symptoms seem very common, and it can be difficult to identify as a mental illness concern. The rule of thumb is when these symptoms are interfering with your ability to function in your daily life, then it could indicate a mental illness concern. In regards to abnormal thinking or emotions, things like feeling sad continuously, confused thinking, a big change in eating or sleeping habits, excessive anger or moodiness. Some physical symptoms would be fatigue, chest pains, headaches, weight gain or extreme weight loss, dizziness. If you notice these symptoms in your students, please report them to the guidance and social work offices, especially if they are pervasive or if the student changed in any way dramatically. We can investigate further and find out what's going on. And it's really important to remember that most mental illnesses do not improve by themselves, and treatment is needed to help the students function. So what to do if you encounter somebody with a significant mental health issue or in a mental health crisis? One of the more popular trainings right now is called Mental Health First Aid. It is designed to give the general population a few steps to help people with a mental health crisis. It's really similar to a physical first aid. You're just a first responder, you're there to help them get through the crisis, and then you let professionals take over. So the first thing you want to do is assess for safety, for yourself and for the person. You can assess for suicide risk, and need to make sure that you and the person are not in immediate physical danger or physical harm. You also want to listen to the person without judgment. Sometimes de-escalation happens just by listening. Let the professionals offer further guidance, and you just be the person that can listen to them. We also want to reassure the person going through the crisis. Give them some hope. Hope is very powerful in treatment and in recovery. We want to encourage the person to seek professional help. This is not something that they need to tackle on their own, and there are professionals out there to help them through something like this. Lastly, we really want to encourage them to look at the support they already have in their lives. Do they have friends, family, peers? All those things can be very helpful, and sometimes the person in crisis just needs to be reminded of those things. Again, treatment and recovery is possible for people experiencing a mental health disorder. Hope is a critical piece. Clients need to be able to believe they have a future and believe that hope and change is possible. Treatment is also not a linear process. You don't really go from step 1 to step 8 in a specific numerical order, and it really looks different for everyone, and it should be self-directed. Treatment also should be strength-based. We want to encourage and empower clients during the process. And treatment should also be holistic. We want to encompass the whole mind, body, social, and spiritual aspects of a person's life, because it all affects them. Here's a list of references that were used for this training specifically, but there are many more references online or even in your library if you're interested in the subject more. Please feel free to contact the guidance and the social work office if you have further questions. We'd be happy to help with anything. This is the suicide prevention training. It's basic training on what you need to know to keep our students and families safe here at Orchard Farm. I wanted to start with some statistics about St. Charles County. We are considered to have a mental health professional shortage in our area. Some of this data is a little bit older, but in the year 2009, we had 47 people die by suicide in St. Charles County. Males are 4 times more likely than females to die by suicide, and older males specifically are more likely to die by suicide than younger males. In our area, 11% of students seriously considered suicide as an option, 6% made a plan, and 5% actually attempted suicide at least once. Here are some of the risk factors that a student might have that could suggest issues with suicide. Some of these are pretty obvious, and some could indicate something else, but just be on the lookout for things like strong feelings of hopelessness, if a student is diagnosed with depression or bipolar disorder, if they have a previous suicide attempt or have a family history of suicide, if the student starts giving away possessions, be on the lookout. Also, if there's a history of being abused or a lack of mental health treatment for the student or in the family. Self-injury is another risk factor, and this includes things like cutting or substance abuse or other risk-taking behaviors. Be looking for the student that's really acting withdrawn or secretive, or if the student is being clumsy or having clumsy accidents. Also look for long sleeves and long pants in inappropriate times of the year if they wear a hoodie all year long. Look for students that have low self-esteem or if they're overwhelmed by everyday things. And also take notice of students that have difficulty controlling their anger. Those can all be risk factors. Again, these are just some of the risk factors that could play a role. They do not guarantee a student will have a problem with suicide. This slide can be used as a checklist that could possibly indicate an issue with depression, and depression and suicide have been shown to have a strong correlation through research. This is not a diagnostic tool, so don't get confused. You will not be diagnosing anybody with depression. This is just a checklist of possible indicators, and it can help you keep track of behaviors that you are seeing in your students, just to kind of help you stay organized. Be looking for 3 to 5 of these symptoms that have been occurring for at least 2 weeks continuously. Some examples are problems with authority, lack of concentration, feelings of hopelessness, thoughts of suicide or wishes for death, or excessive drug abuse. Some of the most obvious warning signs that are clear indicators of suicidal behavior need to be reported immediately to the guidance and social work team, and they'll be investigated further. We cannot take chances with something so serious. Even if you hear a kid who might be joking, still report this and we will investigate it further. If you hear a kid say things like they're threatening suicide, such as, "I just want to kill myself," or "things would be better without me here." If a student is usually depressed but all of a sudden is really cheerful, this could indicate that the student has already made a plan and feels better about having a way out. If the student is not keeping up with their hygiene like they did before, can be a warning sign. And again, looking at risk-taking behaviors, such as an unusual interest in guns, or driving very recklessly, or significant substance abuse. This is a T-chart of basic things a teacher should and should not do, and can be used as a quick reference in the future for you. Things you should do. Do offer support to the students. Make sure to tell the counselor or the social worker immediately if you suspect anything. And do help eliminate stigma and make the student feel more comfortable. This is a very sensitive topic, and sometimes they have a really hard time disclosing. Be willing to accept depression as an illness, and do not judge the student. Things a teacher should not do. Do not ignore the student or the student's behavior. Do not make promises that you cannot keep. Do not keep it a secret. I know we can have a close relationship with our students, but these are things we cannot keep to ourselves. We have to report it to keep them safe, which is always our number one priority here at school. Do not try and handle this by yourself. This is a process that needs to have other people involved. The parents need to know what's going on, and we need to get a professional involved to get the student evaluated to make sure that they are safe. One of the most active agencies involved with suicide prevention is called CHAD's Coalition. The agency was started due to the loss of a student named Chad who died by suicide. They go around and do presentations and educate people on suicide prevention. CHAD's Coalition has developed a plan of action for teachers, staff, and any other adults that work with kids. It's called the ACT method, and it consists of 3 pretty simple and universal steps. The first step is to acknowledge. If you notice that one of your students is showing signs of depression or has a change in behavior, talk to that student about it. Make sure your speech is calm, direct, and as supportive as possible, and make sure you have this conversation without other students around. We do not want to embarrass a student and close them off. For example, maybe after class you just mention, "Hey, I noticed that you've been really tired lately. What's going on? Is there anything I can do to help?" Sometimes just asking if someone is alright can make a big difference. I was at a training one time and a video of a person talking about his attempted suicide was shown. He said he was sitting on the public bus on the way to end his life by jumping off a bridge. He was crying. He said that if anyone, even a stranger, would have asked him if he was okay, then he would not attempt suicide. But no one asked him. He was lucky he survived. But the point is that one person could have made the difference in his decision, and that's kind of what we want you guys to be for your students. The second step to this method is to care. Listen to the students' concerns. Let them know that you sincerely care about them. Use active listening techniques. For example, it sounds like you are saying that you feel extremely sad. Let them know that their well-being is important to you, and reassure them that they are not in trouble. The third step is to tell. Make sure you report this to a counselor or the social worker. We will get the parents involved about our concerns, and we will make referrals as necessary to outside agencies to address these concerns. I want to stress to you that you are not alone in this process. We are here to help you and the student through this. The ACT method is probably something most of you are already doing. This just kind of gives it a name. These are just some quick references that were used to make this presentation. There are many more out there, and I would encourage you to become familiar with this subject. You'll notice there's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline on there, and also something called KUDO, which is Kids Under 21, which is a teen-run hotline for students to call in and talk confidentially about their concerns with suicide. Also, the guidance counselors and the social worker will be happy to help you if you have any further questions or concerns. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everyone to today's staff training, providing an understanding of Section 504 non-discrimination plans.
In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was enacted to ensure that federally funded programs be accessible to all students with disabilities. This led to the establishment of 504. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as ADA, was established, extending protections for all employers with 15 or more employees. In 2008, ADA was reauthorized, and the definitions of disabilities and impairments were broadened.
Section 504 of the Americans with Disabilities Act is a broad civil rights law which protects the rights of individuals with disabilities in programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance. It covers children who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. A parent or staff member can refer a student for a 504 eligibility determination at any time throughout the year. Within 5 days of the referral date, the counselor must provide the parents with the following documentation: information regarding Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the 504 procedural safeguards, and the referral for determination of 504 eligibility. Once a 504 non-discrimination plan is in place, it must be reviewed annually for effectiveness. The student will also be reevaluated every 3 years to determine whether or not he or she is still in need of a 504 non-discrimination plan. At the eligibility meeting, a team comes together to determine whether or not a student meets the eligibility requirements for a 504 plan. This team is made up of the student's teachers, parents, guidance counselor, at least one administrator, and the student. If the team finds that the student meets the eligibility requirements, the professional school counselor develops a specific 504 plan.
Under 504, a disabled person is defined as a person with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, including caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, working, communicating, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, and thinking.
A major life activity also includes the operation of a major bodily function, including but not limited to functions of the immune system, normal cell growth, digestive system, bowel, bladder, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, reproductive functions, brain, and neurological.
Compliance and enforcement. 504 non-discrimination plans are locally overseen by the school counselor at the building level, who acts as the case manager. 504 compliance is enforced by the United States Office for Civil Rights. 504 non-discrimination plans are legally binding documents that follow students from building to building and school district to school district. As the result of the broadened definition of the disabilities and impairments from the 2008 reauthorization, schools are expecting to see an increase in those students eligible for 504 non-discrimination plans.
Thank you for attending the staff training on 504 non-discrimination plans.
Hi, this is the McKinney-Vento Act training. It's our training on homeless students and the education for homeless students. We also want to use the saying students in transition because sometimes the word homeless can kind of put families on a defensive. This act dictates the orchard farm and the federal procedures on educating our homeless students. The McKinney-Vento Act was created in 1987 because of a growing homelessness population in America. McKinney was the Republican politician and Vento was the Democratic politician. They got together and made this Education Act to make sure that kids who are homeless or experiencing homelessness can still get their education. It's really to reduce the barriers for kids. When working with students in transition, we really want to focus on what's in the child's best interest. We look at a couple different things when taking this into account. We look at school stability. Should they stay in their school of origin? Should they move to their school of residence? We look at school access, and we also look at support for academic success. We want to make sure the students have what they need at their school in order to be successful academically. The school makes the decision, but ultimately the parents do. It's a very family empowering act. If the parents don't like what the schools come up with, they can appeal this act, and there's an appeal process we have to go through to justify why we made a decision. But the most important thing is we want to look at what's in the student's best interest. When seeing if a student qualifies for the McKinney-Vento Act, we looked at 3 different things: fixed, regular, and adequate. Those are the most important things to remember. Fixed is defined as a structure that is permanent, a home or an apartment. A car is not fixed, a boat is not fixed. When we look at regular, we want to make sure that the student can go there every single night. It's not just some nights here, some nights there. Every single night, majority of the time, this is where they go at the end of the day. Adequate. We want to make sure that the place has heat or electricity or water. Air conditioning is not required, but if they don't have one of the big things like water, then it's not going to be an adequate dwelling. If a student's missing any one of the 3 of these, then they're considered McKinney-Vento eligible. Each determination is kind of made on a case-by-case basis, depending on the family and their living arrangements. If you hear students say, like, our electric's been turned off, or, oh, we're going to stay with the neighbors because our water's not working anymore, go ahead and report that to the guidance office. They can make sure they get it to the homeless liaison, and the homeless liaison will do an investigation, make contact with the family, talk to them about what's going on, and then the liaison and the homeless coordinator will work together to make the best possible decision for this family if they're eligible or not. Unaccompanied youth are another subcategory in McKinney-Vento eligible students. We see it mostly in the older grades, high school ages. They receive the same services as students who are homeless, and an unaccompanied youth is really just defined as a youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. There's no age limit, so they can be, as young as 1, 2, or 3, or they can go all the way up to age 21. It also doesn't matter if a youth chose to leave or if they were kicked out. In both situations, they qualify as unaccompanied and they're eligible for services. Another subcategory is students awaiting long-term foster care placement. So if children are in short-term placement or emergency placement, they are still eligible for homeless services. If a student is in a long-term foster care placement, then they should attend their school of residence. Incarcerated youth are also kind of in this category, but they are not McKinney-Vento eligible. Incarcerated youth are getting their education through the state juvenile system. Regardless of documentation, McKinney-Vento eligible students should be enrolled immediately. They should be enrolled in regular, full-time classes and are eligible to participate in any other activities that any non-McKinney-Vento eligible student can participate in. We can work on getting shot records or birth certificates or social security cards kind of in the interim. That's the homeless liaison's job, is to kind of work with families to make sure that we do get documentation eventually, but it should not be a barrier for them to be attending school. Also, for example, there are some state laws that kind of contradict this, but since the McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law, it supersedes those state laws. So one of the examples is the Safe Schools Act. Says that you have to have proper documentation before you can enroll in school. Well, if they're McKinney-Vento eligible, since McKinney-Vento is a federal act, it supersedes the state law of that. Unaccompanied youth also should be enrolled immediately. They don't have to have a guardian with them. They can enroll themselves, or the homeless liaison can enroll them. Legal guardianship is not supposed to be a barrier for unaccompanied youth. Guardianship can be kind of sorted out a little bit later between the homeless liaison and the unaccompanied youth and the family, if there's one. Transportation is one of the services provided to students who are McKinney-Vento eligible or who are in transition. We are required to provide transportation to students who qualify. If a student becomes homeless and is still living in the school of origin, then the school of origin is solely responsible for the transportation costs. If a student is living outside the school of origin, for example, a student becomes homeless, they move in with a friend who lives in Fort Zumwalt School District, Orchard Farm and Fort Zumwalt will split the cost of transportation equally. We try and send a bus if possible because it's safer, but we also utilize cab services if the commute is excessively far away. There's no time limit on how long families can get transportation. The state recommends that best practice is 2 years. Here we reevaluate it every year and see where families are at, and we make our determination, but a best practice is to let transportation go for students for 2 years. Another service that homeless students qualify for is free breakfast and lunch. They don't have to fill out a sheet or have a parent signature. The homeless liaison talks to the family, makes the determination, and then contacts the food services at the school district, and they get them signed up. That's the end of this training. If you have any questions or would like further information, please see the Special Services Office, and we can get you more information as needed. Thank you.
In accordance with School Board Policy EGAAA, all employees must abide by the provisions of the current copyright and intellectual property laws. There are 5 basic areas that copyright laws protect. The first is reproduction, which is making copies. The second covers how and to whom items are distributed. The next is adaptation, which involves changing the format. For example, making your own audiobooks or scanning worksheets to create PDF files on your computer. Next is display and public performance, and the last area is digital transmission, which means making items available on the internet that weren't originally introduced via the internet. Interpretation of these 5 rights depends upon the type of media that the work is. The Fair Use Guidelines allow for certain limited use of copyrighted materials without the owner's or creator's permission. For educators, there are 4 factors that have to be considered to determine fair use, and it's important to note that in order to use that material, you must meet all 4 of the guidelines. The 4 fair use guidelines are purpose, nature of the work, amount, and effect. The purpose needs to be educational. The students need to be learning something from that copyrighted material. The copyrighted material should also be published and should be factual or nonfiction based. You also have to consider the amount and use only a small portion of that copyrighted material. You want to avoid using the central portion of that material or the heart of the material. You also have to consider the impact of using that copyrighted material on the potential market. One of the biggest red flags of copyright is if you're trying to save money, you are probably violating copyright, which would mean you are having a negative impact on the potential market. Remember, you have to be able to answer yes to all 4 of these questions in order to use that copyrighted material in good faith. This chart helps with Fair Use Guideline number 3, which is determining the amount of a copyrighted material that you can use. The amount is based on the type of media that the material is, and this chart can be found on the district's copyright webpage. When considering copyright law, it's important to understand the term intellectual property. Intellectual property is anything that a person creates in a fixed, tangible form, from photographs to poetry to blog entries. Even videos created and published on sites like YouTube are considered intellectual property, and they are heavily protected under copyright law. In fact, copyright law protects these creative works and unpublished works even more than those that have an official copyright. So anything that someone posts on the internet is considered intellectual property and is thus protected. It's also important to note that anything that your students create in the classroom is considered intellectual property and is thus protected by copyright laws, and they do hold copyright rights over those creative works. Copyright law protects display and public performance. A public performance is displaying a work in a place open to the public or at any place where a substantial number of persons outside of a normal circle of a family and its social acquaintances is gathered. Therefore, a school, a classroom, and even the school website would be considered public. Therefore, it's important to consider what we show or display in our classrooms and on our web pages. Is it fair use? Showing a movie in your classroom is considered public performance. So to avoid copyright violation, you must meet the following criteria. The movie must be legally acquired, which means that you or the school purchased it or you legally rented it. It must be shown in a classroom setting with the teacher present, and it must be linked to the curriculum, meaning that you have to do something with the video, not just watch it. The most common violation here is showing movies as time fillers, rewards, or to keep students occupied. And it's important to note there are several production companies that have sued school districts over showing videos for reward or time fillers. If fair use guidelines do not apply to a copyrighted material that you would like to use, you'll need to request permission to use that copyrighted work. On the district copyright webpage, there's a sample letter and detailed suggestions on how to request permission to use or copy copyrighted material. The board does not sanction or condone illegal duplication, reproduction, or distribution in any form. Once notified of a violation, the superintendent or designee will take reasonable steps to remedy the violation. Employees who violate this policy may be disciplined or terminated. All persons who use district resources in violation of law may be prohibited from using district resources in the future and will assume liability for their actions. The district may also seek other legal remedies. For more detailed information on copyright law and fair use guidelines, please visit the district copyright webpage found under Teacher Resources at the link below. Please see your library media specialist with any copyright questions you may have.
Policy EHB, Technology Usage Training. The Acceptable Use Policy outlines the guidelines and behaviors that users are expected to follow when using school technologies or when using personally owned devices on the school campus. The OFSD network is intended for educational purposes only. All activity on the network or while using district technologies will be monitored or retained. Access to online content via the network may be filtered in accordance with our policies and federal regulations, including the Children's Internet Protection Act. Users are expected to follow the same rules for good behavior and respectful conduct online as offline. Misuse of school resources can result in disciplinary action. OFSD makes a reasonable effort to ensure user safety and security online, but will not be held accountable for any harm or damages that result from use of school technologies. Users of the district network or other technologies are expected to immediately alert district personnel of any concerns for safety or security. OFSD may provide internet access, desktop computers, tablets, laptops, video conferencing capabilities, online collaboration, email, and more. As new technologies emerge, OFSD will attempt to provide access to them. The policies outlined in this document are intended to cover all available technologies, not just those specifically listed. All technologies provided by the district are intended for educational purposes. All users are expected to use good judgment and to follow the specifics of this document as well as the spirit of it. Be safe, be appropriate, and be kind. Use common sense, and if you don't know, just ask. Users should abide by the same acceptable use policy when using school devices off the school network as on the school network. All users are expected to treat these devices with extreme care and caution. Users should report any loss, damage, or malfunction to school personnel immediately. Users may be financially accountable for any damage resulting from negligence or misuse. OFSD provides its users with access to the Internet, including websites, resource content, and online tools while on campus. That access will be restricted in compliance with SIPA regulations and school policies. Internet activity may be monitored and records may be retained indefinitely. Users must understand the Internet filter is a mandatory and vital safety precaution. Users must not circumvent the Internet filter. Users should follow district protocol to alert the building administrator or submit a site for review if a site is blocked and the user believes it should not be. Users should follow district protocol to report sites that are not blocked but that the user feels should be blocked. Recognizing the benefits collaboration brings to education, OFSD may provide users with access to websites or tools that allow communication, collaboration, sharing, and messaging among users. Availability and use may be restricted based on district policies. District-provided email accounts should be used with care. User email, files, photographs, app usage, etc. will be monitored and archived to meet legal obligations. Users should be careful not to share personal identifying information online. Sharing inappropriate personal information or content is strictly prohibited. Be aware when opening files or following links from unknown or untrusted origins. Communicate with appropriate, safe, mindful, and courteous conduct. Posts, chats, sharing, and messaging will be monitored. Students are allowed to use personally owned devices on the OFSD network. It is the teacher's responsibility to allow or disallow the use of the device in the classroom. OFSD is not responsible for lost, stolen, or damaged personally owned devices. If you have any questions or comments about policy EHB, please email the Technology Department at itdepartment@ofsd.k12.mo.us.